push your little buttons. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We've got quite a bit to cover today.
Lehman, do you mind bringing your mic to your,
That better?
probably?
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Okay, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. First, I think we're going to talk about broadband.
I think we'll do that quickly. Does that,
That's pretty quick, yeah. I guess I was thinking on the way down here, here comes Tom Pico, would be to just do a little quick introduction on some of the conversation we've had before, because we haven't been online before when we've had these conversations, and that over time, we've been looking at how we can introduce fiber to more of the community, if not all of the community, for access to broadband as a way of providing better access.
Excuse me, I don't think you're welcome, so thank you.
Yep.
Shall I sit up here?
hi, Mag.
So what we're trying to do is we've been having a conversation over time about broadband and trying to see how we can bring it to more of the community, faster internet access through fiber. Rockport has a downtown, they have a municipally owned system. We've been looking at what the different options are for us with working with private companies or town private-public partnerships, and how we can get it as a way to get high-speed fiber out to homes in more remote areas than just the downtown area. And looking at things such as a utility owned regionally or individually, however we do that. And I've been having some conversations with people in the industry, and was just going to report that there's been some interesting new conversations on how public-private systems might work and what they're looking at, because they realize that it behooves them. You know, all the different industries are trying to come into the downtown. They want to be in where the numbers are, the density, but not in the more remote areas. So some of the local companies are looking at how they can help us get to the less dense areas. And one of the ways, when we look at the solar panels that we've done, where we've been working with the companies where we rent the solar panels and then at the end we own them, that's one of the models that was being discussed for fiber, which I thought was really interesting, that we could perhaps put in some town money, then put in, and then have an investment from the private company where we're leasing it, they're managing it, and in the end, we own it. So I just thought that was a really interesting new model that I hadn't really heard anybody talking about before. So I just wanted to mention
That's a great,
Mention that.
interesting idea. I haven't heard that.
thought that was really
Like the
interesting.
fiber purchasing agreement.
Right. Yep. So, you know, when we start looking at areas, and we had a conversation about the, getting the community to understand the importance of it, because, you know, it's more than just Netflix and being able to watch a movie. It's about being able to upload for all the people that are living here that are actually working from home, and be able to move large files. I know I've heard recently of a couple of people looking at properties that they didn't look at because there wasn't access to higher speeds. So I think for both property values and tax values, and getting younger people who work from home and work elsewhere, work remotely, something to keep looking at. So,
How is anybody else, have they done this anywhere else in Maine?
no, not that, and I've just been doing some research on other public-private things and didn't see anything like that. I thought it was kind of interesting.
Should,
Still having trouble hearing both people here. I don't know.
yeah, and I'm not sure we can do much about that,
Oh, okay.
honestly. I think we can speak as loud as we can. I think that's what we'll do. What do you think we should do from here? I mean, should we reach out to some utilities locally and talk to
We
them
can have a
about
couple,
that?
I mean, we've talked with GWI, and we haven't talked about a model like that. GWI, LCI, there's a couple others. And then we also wanted to have a meeting coming down the line on public utility,
Yeah.
have a conversation with Rockport, you know, potentially doing something collaboratively. And
I was just going to say, I think it's a great idea. I think it's essential for the future, is working from home, attracting people. I think it's essential. It's as a select board member, it's probably number one on my priority list of things to get done for the future. So
Well, I think there are a couple bills going through Augusta right now for, the problem is that they look at something like Camden as a town that has density and has money, and we're on the three-ring binder and all of that. But if you start looking at doing some work collaboratively with other towns, if we look at our border with Lincolnville, Hope, Rockport, there's some pretty remote, or rural, I guess is a better way to put it, they're not that remote areas that, the companies are never going to go in there on their own and do that. I think one of our issues is educating ourselves and educating the residents on why it's worthwhile, that it is more than Netflix. It's people like you who are moving big files. It's, it's that kind of thing. And it's telemedicine. It's a lot of different things that impact people's lives. But it's a hard message. I think that was one of the things in Rockport when they had their vote on the bond to study it further. Islesboro has done it, Cranberry has done it, where they're going to be doing the whole island, but that's an island. And Cranberry got federal funding for theirs as well, so that helps. But
Well, how are things going in Rockport right now?
we've had some conversations with them, Rockport and Camden. We've had a couple conversations on the possibility of a utility down the road. Right now, there's a lot of focus in Rockport on the library.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
So that it's just conversation right now.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything active going on. I don't know.
So for tasks going forward, for that, should I reach out to some of the utilities like LCI or GWI and at least approach them about that type of?
Yeah, I think it's worth having another conversation
All right.
with them. And there's the woman that we were going to have, Rick and Rockport has had the conversation with the woman down east where they're forming that utility, and she's willing to come down and have a conversation with us as well.
But they're not doing this kind of like a FPA, they're just doing a utility, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I think we can learn from a lot of the
Yep.
different, it's been out there long enough now that there's a lot of people are starting to get more creative with
Yep.
it. So we can perhaps mix and mingle our
Sure.
options.
All right. So maybe what I can do is I can try to reach out to down east, the folks down east, and see if they're willing to come visit us, and maybe reach out to LCI and GWI at least to see what their thoughts are on. I mean, we've heard from GWI before and
LCI
and
several
LCI
times.
several
but-
times, but I think approaching them from a fiber purchase agreement is a different kind of scenario.
And being more specific, and I think we know more than when we met with them in
Right.
the past, what we're
Yeah.
looking for. So I think we can be a lot more specific on areas that we're trying to do and how to parcel out the areas. And, it would be a phased thing that we would do over time anyway. So, and have a conversation, and call Rick and Rockport, and,
Yeah.
because he's had conversations too.
All right. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Anything developing at the state level with the governor's initiatives around, or at least spoken initiatives around fiber?
Yeah, I mean, I think Robin I think you touched on it. I think the struggle for us will be, and same with the federal dollars that they're trying to make available, is we're just,
Just a rural.
it's really, they're focusing on rural Maine. And
Unless we went at it with, our rural areas and Lincolnville, approach it in partnership with those, I think there's potential. And there's a company out in California that was willing to come and have a conversation with us about it from a regional
Yeah,
perspective.
I'll reach out to them again.
Yeah.
Neighborly?
Neighborly,
Yeah.
yeah. I always want to call them next door. It has something to do with a neighborhood.
It's pretty close.
Talk to Rick too first, because he had the conversation with them where they said they were interested. So, but yeah, as far as the state goes, there's several different bills up there going through right now, and I was up there a couple weeks ago and had a meeting with Aaron Herbig from Belfast, Democrat, and Dana Dow, Republican from Warren, and, it's on everybody's list, no matter where they are in the aisles, just how to get there, but everybody's on board with it being important.
I mean, I think they're tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions dollars shy of what
Yeah,
needs to happen
right.
in the state annually to bring fiber to the state. So, I mean, that's the struggle. Aaron's bill, I think, is going to make 10 million available when the reality is, I think we need 100. million annually to make fiber really work in Maine.
So when you bring in if we can do it through a public-private partnership and target some areas where we want to start and then move out from there. And some of it may be, like a red zone kind of thing as well, but you've got to get the fiber out. That base is off the fiber, so if the fiber isn't out there, you can't run those programs either, so.
Okay, any other conversation, discussion? Heart and Soul, you're still on.
I'm still on, next. So the other thing we've been talking about is having community conversations and articulating a community vision. We have so many projects that come out individually, the tannery, the Sagamore Farms, or I'm looking at things like what's going on Union Street. I don't know if everybody saw in the paper today, Tibbetts is going to be moving by the end of the year to Sierra Peaks. What can happen with a property like that? And the comprehensive plan that went through, and a lot of people put a lot of work into that, but how do we develop a community conversation and a community vision? We have our vision of what we think the community should look like. Planning board has theirs, school board has theirs. We all need to be working within a more comprehensive vision, I think. And so I've been looking at a couple of different ways to move that forward. One of them, when we lived in Portsmouth for a little while, Portsmouth Listens, it's based on listening circles, was an awesome project. It won international awards when they set it up. And it all started around the comprehensive plan, and it was the city, it was actually run not by the city itself, but by the editor of the newspaper and an attorney in town. And then the city said, we'll buy into it, we'll support whatever comes out of it. And so there was this year-long process of visioning, brought in hundreds and hundreds of people. I think what tends to happen is we have a conversation around a project and we advertise and we have a meeting around a project, and the people that are interested in that project show up. But there's a whole bunch of other people out in the community that we're not drawing into those conversations. So this creates that conversation, and Portsmouth Listens was very successful. People still, they went through the whole process, came out with a binder like this of a vision for the town, which then went to the planning board and the planning director, who then incorporated things like you're doing now with the comprehensive plan into zoning for the community. And people still show up at meetings, 10 years later, saying, here's what we came up with at Portsmouth Listens. And whenever there is something happens now, it could be an election, it could be a school, it could be any kind of big project, they reconvene Portsmouth Listens and people come back out into that process. So it's something that has gone on now for 12, 13 years. So that's one process, and I've been down talking to them about it. The other is Heart and Soul, which Rockland just went through. Bucksport has gone through, Damerscott has gone through, Biddeford went through it, a lot of them. It's through the Orton Foundation. I mean, these aren't fast. They aren't just that you hold a meeting. They take place over time. Heart and Soul is about a 2-year process. And this is the basic little guide for sort of putting it together, how to do it, that I printed off the other day. But there's a process whereby you're creating a committee, going out, and you spend a year collecting stories and collecting visions from people in the community, and then bringing that all together and articulating what comes out of that. And then there's action plans, and it just goes on. And there's a person that has, Orton Foundation funds, actually, Jane LaFleur, who's local, or they have been, we have to apply for it, but she comes in as a consultant to help pull it all together, has a lot of equipment and a lot of the tools for doing it. It's a pretty cool process, and I think you come out, you participate in the one in Rockland. I've done a shorter version of one a few years ago. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what just happened in Rockland.
Well, I would say that they were quite successful in getting pretty broad community engagement, and it's not something that happens overnight. It's, like you said, it's 18 months to 2 years to really finish the process, but I think that they had some good success in getting a broad cross-section of the community involved, so.
How do you fund this? Did I miss that part? I mean,
There are a bunch of different models that they have done. I met with Jane a couple weeks ago, and that wasn't the main part of our conversation, so I don't have real details on how it is for a presentation. But Some towns have done it, they suggest a person to be a coordinator for the project. So some towns have come in and hired that person. It's a 40-hour-a-week job for the 18 months to 2 years that they're doing it. So in some communities, the town says, here's the money, we're going to fund it. In other towns, they're going out and getting grants and funding it. Some towns, they have done it with volunteers. Some towns have done a mix, where you have a part-time coordinator, paid coordinator, then bring in some volunteer co-coordinators to work on it going forward. I think Rockland had 2 volunteer coordinators, I believe. Bucksport did half and half, I think. Jane LaFleur did it down in Damascotta. The Main Street program did it in Biddeford. So there's all sorts, there's a model, but there's different ways to do the model going forward. And it's really about getting the voices into the conversation that aren't there. So you might go up to the high school. I mean, how many times do we have these conversations and we're bringing the high school kids or the middle school kids if we were doing something downtown, and this is where they go after school gets out. So go to the churches, go to Rotary, go to middle school, go to, Watershed. I think Watershed School could potentially be a resource for stuff because they do so much community work. I just think it's something that we should be thinking about for driving a lot of these conversations moving forward.
How could we coordinate it with the downtown master plan? Because we've done a lot of community vision work through that. I mean, is there something that's already been done that we could use towards that?
There are a lot of towns have used sometimes it goes back and changes those things because you're bringing in more people.
And times change.
And times change, But yeah, I think a lot of times there are other documents that you're using as a base.
Yeah, okay.
I just think as a planner, what Tom said, bringing people from all different perspectives together is so critically important. I mean, we got a huge crowd here today for one item on this agenda. And my gut says is the crowd's here on one side of an issue when, I mean, it's not a wrong thing, it's a right thing. People have their perspective on an issue, but people tend to come out when they're passionate about something. That doesn't mean there's other people out there that don't care. It's just they may not be as passionate about a certain issue. So if there's a way through Heart and Soul to kind of try to bring everyone's perspectives together and accept them and appreciate and value everyone's opinions and try to bring consensus to something is.
And it's not issues-based, that's a big thing. So you're not bringing it in to look at any particular project or issue that's going on in the community. It's really looking at something forward. So it's getting out there in 2 years when we have a project come up, then you can look back at the thing. And you have to get the select board on board. They suggested having in the committee somebody that's an employee of the town, somebody that, is on an elected official, a community volunteer. I mean, they really outline what the process is and who you should be looking at to be on that organizing committee moving forward so that you have buy-in from all sorts of different groups.
So is the structure of this set, I mean, it's like a notebook here, the instruction manual, then you, okay, so then you as staff or however you decide to identify a leader, have what you need to pull this off,
Yep.
Is that right? Is
Yep.
that what I understand?
And we're lucky with this one. Jane LaFleur is here. I mean, she was Friends of Midcoast Maine, and she's the expert on this really kind of in New England. I mean, they're using it all over the country. It was interesting, the Orton Foundation and why they started, and it was really around, so what did he say? Something, there was an issue that had come up on a piece of property. Somebody had come in and wanted like a petting zoo of tigers. I don't know, it was something like that, some kind of an amusement park halfway up a mountain somewhere. And he said, by the time they got done, this has lasted so much longer than the park, going through the public hearings, permitting, building, running it, and it finally fell apart. And, they're still using the thing that kind of triggered it, it triggered the study that they came forward, so.
Interesting.
But yeah, there's a definite outline of what to do, but all towns do it differently, so it's interesting to start looking at how the different towns have handled it over time.
But it sounds like a sizable commitment.
It is a sizable commitment. It's a commitment in time, and if you don't have the commitment from the select board to start, it's no use even starting it, because somebody has to say, we believe in the process and therefore we'll believe in the outcome. And if you can't get that at the beginning, nobody's going to believe in the process, and then you might as well not do it. So it needs to be a lot more research into, and I think you can mix the two different kind of programs. I think we need to do a lot more research on what we might want to do, and it'd be a much better presentation than this is, bringing it before the select board. But anyway.
Does the group think I ought to kind of work on this a little bit and delve into it a little more, and then have a little more discussion with you and the select board on it?
And I'd be happy to come in with Jane and have a more in-depth conversation about.
It might be good if we could have her with this group at a future meeting. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Just to
Maybe
see
we
what-
can meet with Jane, and then we can bring Jane into another meeting.
She'd be happy to. I'll
Awesome.
speak for her.
And she's from Camden.
She's from
Yeah.
Camden,
Just down the street.
just down the street. We can
There
walk
are
here.
several other mid-coast communities that have
Yeah,
done this in the
yeah.
last few years that
Yeah.
could provide some input too, I'm sure, so.
And it would be interesting to get, references or input from, the town planners or the town select board and the different people within the town to see how the different sectors responded to the process as well. And I think it started in Rockland was Audra there when it started, or was it after she left?
It might have been right at the tail end of her time in
Okay.
Rockland. yeah.
We did a short one in Rockland. It was actually Rockland and Rockport that went from the McDonald's intersection into, I guess, what is the road that goes down to, I guess to Glen Cove? We did that area, and so we had Rockport and Rockland doing it, and we had people from both, and property owners, but that was actually before Audra came in there, so I don't know, but
Great.
Any other thoughts on that? Group think that's worth pursuing, at least to the next meeting? Okay.
All right, we'll work on that for next month, hopefully.
Good idea.
another good idea.
Thanks, Robin.
Okay. Land assessments.
Yeah,
Get a handout there?
I did. I don't know if everyone got one of the group, but sure you got.
Just one page, Chairman.
One sheet, double-sided.
Yeah.
I do. I think you may have one in front of you there. Yep.
There you go.
And I can,
It's hidden.
and
It's one of these
and maybe
two.
some of the folks out there would like one. And this just follows up a little bit. I kind of spoke to it a little bit more. I haven't done a whole heck of a lot on it other than, so I was asked to Cedac to look at, and the select board kind of was curious about town properties that we have. The town has almost 700 acres total of land. And when we're looking at economic development opportunities, housing opportunities, affordable housing has been a pretty significant issue for Cedac and for the select board. They're concerned about affordably priced homes in town and attracting families. And what can the town do from that perspective? So what I did was I kind of looked at the town property that we have. We have a total of 700 acres, roughly. About 500 acres of that 700 is green space, recreational space, open space, parks. So again, 500 of that 700, which is pretty significant, especially when you look at what the town has with the state park, as well as Coastal Mountain Land Trust property. We've got about 67 acres of cemetery and about 30 and a half acres of municipal buildings. That includes this building and parking lots and wastewater and fire and pump stations and the like.
Does it include school as well?
I did not look at school property, I did not. I did not also look at Midco Solid Waste property, and there's, I think, 13 or so acres, 8 acres, Midco Solid Waste land. And then that means, and then there's some random, very small little pieces and parts of lots everywhere. So available land that's vacant in town, we've got about 77 acres at Sagamore Farm, 3 acres, actually less than 3 acres, about 2.8 at the tannery site. And that's when you take out the trail easement. And then Wiley Road, there's 13 and a half acres over there.
What is that? On Wiley Road.
Where is it?
I mean, what
What is it?
What is, what's?
I'm going to assess that a little bit more with Jeff Senders, engineer, civil engineer, environmental engineer, assess that property a little bit more. There were a couple of affordable houses that were put in over there, but there's 13 and a half acres there.
It's just undeveloped.
Undeveloped
Where
land.
is that? I missed
Wiley
it.
Road.
Wiley Road, or maybe it's Willie Road, I don't know how you pronounce it.
Where is it?
Wiley,
Go
up
down
off
to the
of,
corner and then go up
Oh,
north towards the
okay.
Sobel.
yeah.
Oh,
At the end, there's 13 and a half there. And Tremont, there's 1.75 acres. That includes the portion of the road that goes in. There's a discontinued road that ends up abutting the cemetery. But there's about 1 3/4 acres there. And then on Rawson Avenue, there's a 1/4 acre lot that's a vacant lot that may be prime for a house at some point. And so at some point, I may look to the select board to look at that from coming, looking at it that perspective of trying to get a house lot, at least on the market. Outside of that, the town has no other property. And it's good to know that. I don't think anyone really had a good understanding of what we had for land. But this just
Have you
shows
kind of
us.
started rating these for use? I mean, we've had conversation, it even came up in the budget committee this year about potential properties for use for solar farms or something like that, where you might not be building a home, but it might be more accessible for a solar array.
That's a good question, and we're starting to do that. That's what part of this is. So that also came from a conversation we had with the select board about solar. There's an idea of expanding the solar farm. Are we putting it in an expansion in the right location? So that's another reason why I was looking at all this property.
Another conversation that came out of the budget committee, Lehman, you were there, I think, Maria Libby came and spoke with us about what was going on with the school budget and where they were, and we talked about the new middle school. And while they didn't have money built into it for putting a solar array on the roof, because there's issues with this building that it can't withstand a solar array on the roof of this building, that building is going to be able to withstand it, but they don't have the money for it. So I wonder, too, down the road, as we look at that kind of thing, if there's possibility of the town, even though it's all the same tax base, we always look at it as school and town, but if the town and the school could potentially partner, if the school isn't going to be doing it, could the town be doing it? It is town property.
That's a great idea. I actually met with a solar engineering firm today, to have similar conversations about, like you just mentioned.
So just put that rooftop down at the bottom
Yep.
here is,
And it doesn't have to be our rooftop.
right,
It doesn't have to be.
right.
It's very true.
Have you assessed or looked at how much of this property has infrastructure, utilities accessible to this vacant property?
Yeah.
If we were looking at something like housing, like
Yeah.
streets and drainage.
So
and
Rawson
water,
Avenue,
sewer.
there's a court,
See that one.
Rawson Avenue has sewer and water, Tannery has sewer and water. The Sagamore Farm does not have sewer and water. Well, it has water, but it does not have sewer.
I bet the
Wiley Road does not have sewer or water.
Is that the road, the property you talked about, there was difficulty accessing it? Was there something that was landlocked? I can't remember.
Yeah, we've got access to that property, actually.
Okay.
And then I'll touch base on landlocked and access when I get to Sagamore after we talk about this one. But again, I just think it's good to have a good understanding of where we are with property. It's amazing to me how much, it's awesome how much green space we have in town, and looking at State Park combined with what the town has and Coastal Mountain Land Trust. I mean, it's clear we value green space in this town. I think, hold on one sec. Go ahead.
13.93 acres, I'm sorry, 13.5 acres Wiley Road, sludge disposal.
sludge been spread on that land?
It's a good question. Some of these are not accurate. These are some comments that were in the assessing's notes. And I did just reach out to wastewater treatment today about that specific one. And then there was another one on, and historically there was some, and I don't know the extent of it, but historically in the past, there was some sludge spread on some of that property. As I understand, and I've been out there, it's pretty much forested right now. So there hasn't been any sludge spread on that land in a long, long time, but
2 lots were carved out of that.
2 lots were carved out of that, so.
What's the definition of sludge?
So,
Material waste from the end of our wastewater treatment.
right. And I don't know if that was from R, and again,
Contaminant? Okay.
well, yeah, I mean, there are some, I will say there's some new news on sludge disposal, and in forever, USDA and the state have been trying to do, what do you do with this sludge that is the byproduct of wastewater treatment plants? They compost it and they do all this other stuff to it, and then they land apply it. There are have been some nasty things that have been found in recent, there's a farm down in,
Dairy. There's a dairy farm.
yeah, the dairy farm down in, like, outside of Livermore Falls area, I believe, or maybe even further south of there. And there was something that they had found that it traced it back to the sludge. And there's actually a new bill in the legislature to how to look at sludge, to assess sludge from that perspective, contamination. Totally understandable. Any other thoughts or questions on that?
Second one?
But I had the same question about the sludge when I saw it on wastewater disposal sludge. I thought the same thing. But then I saw the aerials, and when I went out there, I mean, there's no place you could land apply sludge today out there at all. I don't know when the last time. And wastewater's looking into it to let me know when the last time they're aware of
Well, is that-
any application there.
I mean, even if it was a distant past, does that contaminate that property? Is that something that, okay, it's been 20 years, we can use it?
An environmental scientist, but I mean, the stuff that they found, I mean, they've been land applying sludge on dairy farms
Yeah.
as a way to, they pay the farmer a little bit, take this good fertilizer we've got. Well,
They were composting it for the fields out there for this dairy farm, and then they're finding the milk is contaminated, and so they've traced that back.
To the
And so,
farm.
yeah.
while his well's contaminated, he can't operate a dairy there anymore at all.
That's just within the last,
Last 6 months, 3 months, this came up. So at least the state and the legislature's on top of it, I believe, as best they can be. At least they're looking at it. So I'll move forward on that, just continue kind of my assessment on how best to address like the 13 and a half acres. That's a good chunk of land. If there's something we can do. I know the slopes up there aren't conducive to development, or at least housing on all of that. But at least if there's a way to get a couple house lots
it would
up
be
in there.
interesting to bring this out and have different categories, like appropriate for housing,
Yeah.
appropriate for
Yeah.
in your spare time.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I will say, my thought, I'm just thinking of, if we do come up with land that's available, like this Rawson Avenue lot, I think it's important the affordability issue is significant, and, we've talked about it, the select board's talked about it, and to just put a house, a lot on the market for sale, I think we need to be smart in how we do that, so that we kind of manage housing affordability over time.
If we had a community vision.
Yeah,
But I mean, if you look at what just happened in Rockland, where they went through with the tiny house thing and what that process was, I mean, that's the kind of thing that would be awesome, to look at a property like that and how could you really use it? What are the different options in affordable housing? Because there's a lot of different models with that too. So before we rush off and said, oh, let's make it, and I'm not saying you're going to, but, before we come up with something like that and say, we value affordable housing and we know that people need to be, that workforce housing for all, however you want to term it, that we start coming up with what the options are and how that can happen, and then find that we have some property potentially that's available. That would be a great match.
For sure. And the affordable housing, people think of Section 8 all the time of affordable housing, and I worked in Bangor for a long time, so there's a lot of that. And there's a need for that type of housing everywhere, but there's also the need for affordably priced housing, which doesn't meet this,
And in perpetuity. I
And
mean,
in
because
perpetuity.
there's a lot of times in affordable housing, somebody will come in and build an affordable housing complex, and the first time that something goes on the market, it's back up to market rate. So how do you keep that affordability built in
correct.
over time, where people can still reasonably make money on the sale of their property if they own it, but you're
Yeah.
also maintaining an affordable housing stock?
And I am set to meet with the folks from the Island Housing Trust out in Bar Harbor, MDI Way, this month. They're, I think, trying to address that issue, and they're on the forefront of it, I think, in Mid-Coast, or at least on the coast of Maine.
What's the one in Portsmouth? There's an affordable housing group down in Portsmouth that has done a ton of work, Seacoast, for the Seacoast area, and what they're doing, that's another really good resource.
I will look there.
I'll come up with the name of it,
Yeah.
probably in 15 minutes.
Just shout it out.
Shout it out.
I apologize, I got to duck out.
All right, Tom, thank you so much.
Sagamore Farms?
Sagamore Farm. So this kind of comes out of, we had talked about this briefly, and this obviously shows up on this list of town-owned properties as 77-acre piece. There's been, over time, the town is, we've put some mountain bike trails or some recreational trails up in there. There's a solar farm, small solar farm on that property. It is a pretty incredible piece of property, and we haven't done anything with it. And so the select board and we have talked about what are we going to do with it. The Energy Committee has looked to do a solar farm expansion there. And I think before we do anything, when we talk about solar, I think it's important to use property in the highest and best, most appropriate way. And when you look at tying up lands with solar, it ties it up forever into a solar farm. And it may not be a bad thing, but you tend to want to do those things on marginal properties that you can't really develop for one reason or another. So rather than just moving forward on doing a solar expansion there right off the bat, the select board had asked me to look at this property and at least what can we do with that property. And one of the first things you need to do, especially with that one, is how do you access Sagamore Farm? We have the Sagamore Farm Road that comes down. It's the piece of property that we own that comes out to Route 1 is fairly wide. The one challenge there is there's a very large stream that runs along it, a very large culvert at the base of that hill at Route 1. And then we have a access easement for solar installation only over Chip Late's property. So I have been working with, I've just over the course of the years, I've met and have known a handful of pretty good traffic engineers in the state. So I reached out to a couple of them to ask them some questions and get some ideas. I'm meeting with a traffic engineer that the town will be hiring at a very, very good, reasonable cost to assess access to Sagamore Farm and what we can do traffic permitting wise. Whether we can use the Sagamore Farm Drive property that we own that comes down to Route 1 or try to access it up through Chip Late's property. And I've had a conversation with Chip. And again, this is just to kind of prepare for what can we do with this property or what should we do with this property. And before we start asking those questions, we really need to understand what it would take to access the property. And so again, I'm meeting with a traffic engineer tomorrow. I mean, it's a spectacular property. The trails, the recreational trails up there are very primitive, very nice. I think they could work well with a small residential development up there. I think they could work well with a commercial office development up there. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. And again, in order to understand anything, we got to figure out the access. So I am meeting with the traffic engineer tomorrow. I'm going to give him a handful of development scenarios for up there so that he can plan for that. And that, again, that would be whether or not we would need a turning lane in or site distance issues, those kinds of things. But again, it's just we've got to start from somewhere. Again, this property's been the town's for a long, long time, and there's been talk over the years about doing something with it. Nothing has ever been done with it. We've talked about hiring a consultant in years past, spending $30,000, $40,000 to hire a consultant to assess that. Before we do that, we can't do anything with it if we can't access it, or if the access is going to be so incredibly expensive. So it just makes sense to do this. I just want to give you an update on that. If you have any thoughts on that, it would help guide me a little bit on development thoughts, development proposals for up there. Because I am going to give him 3 different scenarios. And one was kind of a conservation subdivision of a handful. I don't know how many lots. I got to really take a look at it a little more. And then, as you know, there's been talk in years past about an office park up in there. So I'm going to kind of come from those perspectives. But if someone has any other thoughts or ideas on it, I would
I clocked
love
it
to hear
once.
them.
How far out of town is it? It's under 2 miles. I
Yeah, it's
think.
just over a mile.
Just over a mile?
Yeah.
So it's a walkable.
It's walkable. The sidewalks aren't great there on Route 1. They're fairly narrow. So, you can't walk you can't really comfortably walk abreast walking down the sidewalk there. I don't know why they're that narrow. When DOT did that road, but they are. As you're heading north, as you approach Sagamore Farm Road, the road's fairly narrow in there. So likely we'll have to do a turning lane if we're going to be going left, would be my guess. So
Do sidewalks go all the way up there?
no,
No.
they don't. There is no sewer to the site. There is just water up there. Doesn't mean sewer's not possible.
How far up does sewer go?
Sewer's not that far. Sewer would actually work probably best over the land, going over land, getting a sewer easement through people's properties rather than bringing it down to the street. Because we definitely need a pump station up in there. There's that big dip as you head back into town. Any other thoughts?
Well, any help from DOT if we decide we need to do something with that, or is that on our dime? Any kind of reconstruction of
Our
that?
dime.
Even entrance?
Our dime or the developer's dime if the town decides to go down a developer road.
But
Yeah.
even on the DOT right away, there's no help from that.
Has anybody shown any particular interest that you know of recently?
A couple people, a couple
Yeah.
entities,
I
yeah.
mean, like serious things? I don't know.
I think they're all concerned about access.
Yeah.
So, I think,
I think you're starting in the right place. That would
Yeah.
help determine what goes there, if anything. If you can't.
absolutely.
Could you remind us about the zoning up there again?
It's RU1 up there, so we may, or RU2, we may need to do some zone change up there. So, or maybe do a zoning amendment to the RU1 or RU2. But if we're residential would work there.
Right.
And if we're really serious about attacking affordably priced housing in town, it might be a prime spot to do, a conservation green subdivision, which I think would work well there, would work well in town, and would work well with the existing trails and the existing users of the property.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I still, maybe it goes back to Robin's questions, but, what kind of a community you want to be?
Uh-huh.
We are increasingly residential.
We are.
Maybe that's okay. Look at, historically, we've been a place of employment, and even Tibbetts, if that's going to slip now to maybe residential, it's in the middle of a residential zone, so maybe that makes more sense, but I'd like to see people working. And keeps downtown alive, and
Totally agree.
all of those benefits that create what I call a real community rather than one that's,
Commuter.
looks good, but really is
Right.
a shell in some ways.
Right. I understand. I mean, that's going to be a good
When
question.
the whole conversation started around the middle school and the existing building and whether we were going to save that building or not save the building and what it was, I spoke to several developers around the state at that point who have done school redevelopment into housing, and their whole thing was, how walkable is it to town? That's the first question they all asked. It wasn't even about the building or the property. It was, how easy is it to walk to town? And I think that's for both jobs and residential, whichever way that they might potentially do it. So to have it be to have a piece of property like that that's a mile outside of town that is walkable, whether the infrastructure there is there or not. But that's very walkable and bikeable at a mile. I think we need to really
Agree.
look really hard at how we want that property, because there's only so much of that
Yeah.
kind of land available.
There is. And we could also do mixed use too,
Right.
you know. And we may be able to, commercial office space or up front on that property and maybe do the residential a little bit further up before it starts, grading up the hill towards the park.
Do you know how many acres are hillside and how many are buildable?
I haven't, it's a beautiful piece of property, and there's a couple actually, tables up in there. So I honestly, I don't know off the top of my head, Mark, but I would suggest that there's probably about 18 acres that are steep at the back end of that property.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. There are a couple of wet areas, some vernal pools and some wetlands that I think you'd avoid them, I think, pretty easily if you did a development. You'd be close to them if you came in off of the existing Sagamore Farm Road. You'd be close to a pretty large vernal pool wetland up at the top. If you came in off of Chip Late's property, I think you could avoid them probably pretty easily.
Could we as a committee take a look at that sometime? I'm guessing the Energy Committee and the Pathways Committee and all those guys have looked at that property, and we haven't. as a
Sure.
committee.
We could arrange that.
Yeah,
That's
after,
great.
after mud season, maybe?
We're almost done.
Yeah.
We are almost done.
Bring your snow
Where the
shoes.
solar farm is, that's all I've seen.
Oh, yeah, then there's
I think
the,
it'd be great if we could arrange that.
Yeah, let's do that. We can do that.
Okay.
We've been talking about doing that for a while. We haven't gotten to it yet.
No, we were going to bring
We were
snowshoes.
going to do it
Yeah.
on snowshoes.
Well, you can see it a lot better right now. I mean,
Now we just need our mud shoes.
yeah.
well, I think we're done with that in a week or so.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'll work on setting something up on that one.
That might be something, I mean, has the select board all been there?
I think most people have been to I've been to parts of it, I don't know
Right.
all of it.
I don't know if there's anybody else we would only include in that.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense. I mean, the planning board, I know some of the planning board members were up there before I came here, did some walking around, and there was a small kind of ad hoc group that was looking at it, and nothing really came of it. And that was like the fifth version of that, an ad hoc group that was looking at doing something at Sagamore.
Well,
I mean,
people
we
have talked
we do
about it as
this.
so many different things with, the pathways, or whether it's energy, or whether it's and I don't think housing has been part of that conversation, so kind of have a more rounded conversation.
Well, I think that's important.
Yes.
Anita?
Hi, as a chair of the Energy Committee.
We should probably have
Come on.
Mike passed around, either come up or you could actually hand carry over their issue on.
Thank you. Oh, boy. As chair of the Energy Committee, I can attest to the fact that the Energy Committee is very interested in that site for expansion of the solar array, and we totally understand that there might be other better sites for that kind of work. But the thing that we're struck with is that this is a site that the town has talked about for a long time and felt that it had value for something, but has not taken action and not moved forward. So I don't know what it will take, but I strongly encourage you to do something. because opportunities are actually being lost because of the delay that's represented by trying to decide what to do with that site. I know access is an issue and a problem, and I'd also like to request that the Energy Committee be involved in, if you're planning a walk around, we'd like to have representation there as well.
Anybody else? Okay, let's move on. Tannery, RFP.
All right. Go ahead.
How do you want to handle this? You got, I mean, you want to review what we've got and then talk public comment?
Yep. And maybe I'll start by just saying kind of how we got to where we are today with the RFP piece. So the select board, Cedac has reviewed a draft RFP last month. And Cedac, Lehman and I went to the select board a month or so ago and had a conversation with them when Ransom was up, when we were talking about the Brownfield site, or Brownfield cleanup. And just so everyone knows, we do have a cleanup grant. We were going to move forward on cleaning that up, that site, and doing the actual cleanup work this summer. In order to leverage the cleanup funds and try to get a development of some sort on the property, any kind of development, whether it's playground, whether it's parking lot, whether it's a community building, whether it's a residential building, whether it's mixed use. Any development that happens there has to take into account the cleanup and the cap that is going on that site. So the best scenario is that we put out an RFP that would look to a developer and to work with us to facilitate the development while we're doing the cleanup. So we actually postponed the cleanup for this summer so that we can move forward with this RFP. And then in the meantime, the farmer's market was going to go to the Knowlton Street parking lots. They are actually going back to this site for this summer while we work through this. And hopefully by November, and this is my hope, is that we can, because anything that happens with this property, I think everyone needs to understand, has to go to town vote. And that's been the way it's been since, I think, 2008. Maybe I got that date wrong, but 2008. Anything that happens has to go to town vote. So this is a very wide open, very transparent, very open process, and it will be that way. And so my hope is that we can put this RFP out, and then we can get someone, and I have talked to a handful of entities that have an interest in the property, and that we can take that to voters in November, and then have, find someone that is willing to work with this wide range of interests and desires that we have, and we can come up with a plan that is acceptable to the majority of folks that live in Camden and voters. Understanding that there was the Tannery Work Group that did a lot of work on it, and then there was the Tannery Redevelopment Work Group that did work in 2008 on this, and actually, remember, every year town people vote on if we do anything with this property, it has to be consistent with the guiding principles back from 2008. And we continue to have that as part of our warrant articles every year. So that will not change. That is not changing. I just want to make everyone aware of that. And so when Lehman and I did go to the select board, after we had talked about this with this group, the select board was very, I think, very direct in that they wanted to see the RFP as open as possible rather than as narrow and narrowed and focused, because they want to see who knows what we may get if we have it wide open. And also, the RFP does include the Tannery Work Group recommendations as a guidance, as well as the Tannery redevelopment work groups. recommendations and guiding principles are all included in this RFP when it goes out. So that's where we are. That's kind of how we got to. My plan right now is to send this after you guys provide comments and you feel like you're in a good place with this, is to send this to the select board. The select board, they're the ones that wanted to have the final say on the RFP. And then it will go out. And we do need to move on this relatively quickly. We can't, we can't take another month or another 2 months to do this RFP at all, because otherwise we will not be able to meet that November deadline of getting it on a town warrant and also getting the site cleaned up to EPA's requirements of the grant. So I just think it's important that we finalize this and move it through the process. Okay. I don't know if this is a group want to kind of review.
All of you have seen this. Have you got any, I guess, again, before we take public comments, any observations, comments, anything you want to put into this?
I do. I just think it's important that, just like Jeremy said, to keep it as wide open as possible. We've been sitting on this property for 16 years. I think we've spent over over $900,000 as the citizens of Camden on this property. So why not just at least explore who's interested in it and get the best options out there before narrowing it down even further? And that's just where I come from. Not that I oppose anybody's position. I just want to see it as open as possible to maximize the best use of that property.
Okay. Any other?
Well, I think that's kind of the consensus we had when we talked about it at the last meeting, wasn't it?
It was.
I mean, pretty much
That's-
what you said in there, yeah.
I think there's potential, anybody that gets this is going to come in knowing what's come out of those two reports, and they know that the easiest way to get, any developer knows that the easiest way to get something through is to match the as closely as possible, but I think by leaving it open, you leave it open for creativity, and I think, this is a really cool community, and there's a lot of cool stuff that could happen, and I'd like to see somebody be really creative in how we can use that. I mean, we talked about that years ago, before any of this even started with this current work group, and we wanted to go out, we were starting to go out to developers at that point to say, okay, let's pretend it's a blank slate and none of this exists, and what can you come up with that would be cool? And I think anybody's going to realize that they're in a neighborhood, they're walkable to downtown, it has potential to be a pretty piece of property, it's got the walking trail there, I mean, there's so much going on there that it would be kind of silly for somebody to come in with something so egregiously against any of this, and knowing that it's got to go to a town vote, so.
Well, I would say I think some changes have been made since the first draft was issued, and some of those are reflected in what we see today, but I know there was concern about the whole property being sold or leased or part, and now the language says either or. That's one thing. And also, I think, prominently features the tannery work group's recommendations, and the report will be attached, as I understand it. I guess my next question would be, who is going to review the proposals that are received? Is it a select board? Is it going to be a committee of some sort? Has that been thought through?
Audra and I have had conversations about it. We haven't really narrowed that down yet, to be honest. And I believe Jeff Senders thought he'd be willing to do it. He doesn't feel like he needs to do it, but he'd be willing to be on that list.
How many people are you thinking of? Do you know?
I don't know. I mean, when we did the RFP, there were three of us on that. The brownfield cleanup grant, there were three of us on that review. I know it's very different. I think it needs to be, 3 to 5 people. I think we all come from the perspective that we know what the tannery work group's recommendations were. We know what the prior group's recommendations were, which again are still the recommendations that are tied to the sale of this property. So, I think we all have a good idea and a good perspective of what would work in this town. My hope is that we get a couple that we really like and that we can bring in, and we can maybe even interview in a more public kind of setting. I know developers tend not to like that kind of situation, but, you know, again, what Robin says, I mean, it's a pretty unique property in a very unique town that is walkable, that does have, and when we say the entire property, that the trail easement is forever cut off of this, right? I mean, that is green space, that is park space that is not included in this and won't be included in it. So that's for sure. I don't know, does that help?
I'd like to thank Roger, too, because Roger, and point out, I mean, Roger was part of this tannery work group that's been going on, and Roger, you've been here as part of this group, and you've certainly been the go-between in advocating and making sure that the voices that you've heard are included as much as possible, so I want to acknowledge that, and to thank you.
Well, thank you. I think it would be good if we could give.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that. I know, Lehman, you said you had some comments, maybe
Well, some of these
typos.
are almost editorial or typos.
And maybe you can share those, we can maybe go over those separately or something.
We don't need to do that now.
I think that's-
Just a couple of things that I think it's not going to change what's in here as much as it's just some of the typos and
Yeah,
punctuation. And-
That's fine.
And clarifying, at least in a couple of more instances, that we mentioned purchase or lease.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of other places,
said
I think,
purchase.
for consistency, it just said
Yep.
purchase,
Yep.
and it should say or lease. So that's all I had. And
All right.
I'll hand you this on the way out the door. and
Sure.
you can take a look at it.
Jeremy, quick question, I wasn't able to print it, and I don't remember, what is the date for return of the RFP?
I don't, that was one of
That's
Lehman's
on my
comments
list.
too.
We need
And,
to
I mean, it's really
plan.
dependent on when I can get this to the select board. So,
How, let me ask this, and then we'll look at comments. Traditionally, how long do developers have to reply? How many weeks, days? I mean, is there a standard in the industry that we would say a month, 3 weeks?
yeah, I mean, if it's tough, we're asking for a lot, so, that's going to be the struggle. I mean, I would say a month at the minimum and maybe 6 weeks.
Okay.
I will say that there are like 3 different entities that I have met with that have an interest in the property, and I think they're waiting for this to come out. And at least 2 of them do, just so people know, at least 2 of those places, and the third knows about it, but at least 2 of those entities do public playground spaces too, and park spaces. So I'm just throwing that out there because I know that has been a big part of the Tannery Work Group's recommendations is public playground areas. And 2 of these entities, they do those, and they understand the value to those, and would do something that is open to the public as well. So I'm just wanting everyone to know that.
Okay.
So maybe we want to start taking some comment. I will say, I know that a lot of people are raising their hands. That's fine. We have to be out of here by 5:30. There's an energy committee that comes in after us.
So we've got.
That said, I don't want people to feel like their comments aren't valued, or I don't want to not take them. So if people want to reach out to me and send me an email or hand deliver those comments to me, that would be great. And then I can at least provide those to the select board. Does that make sense? And obviously, we're going to have to limit, I think, comments to probably about 3 minutes would be my guess, based on the number of
Get a
people that are
sense of
talking.
How many want to speak? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Okay.
Go ahead.
Question?
Let's make the microphone, you need to have the microphone.
Is there a time limit on the grant money that we have to clean up? And does it matter which entity ultimately ends up going in there? Does that affect how the cleanup is done?
Yeah, so the state changed their residual action guidelines. They're what they're called RAGs. So this is the kind of the contaminants that are there and what kind of use can happen on it. They've changed those regulations. So we do have the ability with ransom to move material around and clean up one portion of the property completely, say. And so we can completely clean up one area of the property. If to provide a certain use that may not be allowed in another area of the property. But we do have 3 years to finish the project, correct, from when we got the
I
grant.
have a principal question, please. My name is Askia. and I was
Microphone.
part of the group. I can speak very loud if
This
you
goes
need me
to the public, otherwise they can't hear you.
This goes
It's
on.
on the
This
internet.
is not.
They want to hear all this?
We're all on.
My question is it not about time that the select board pick up their responsibility and finish this matter? We spent so many times, or so long time, and we thought we were moving in the right direction, broad, and we had 3 meetings with the public, and they all appreciated our work. I cannot understand that I'm standing here and talking with my little irritated voice, but maybe you people can explain it to me. I like to hear what you want to say.
All right, so maybe I'll comment to that really quickly, or maybe I can take your, and I don't know if you're referring to the Tannery Work Group's recommendations. If that's what you're referring to, that is what you're referring to. That said, there was a proposal that, or recommendations that came out of that included some open space, some public space, community space, as well as multi-use building. We can't do anything with the property at all until we put something out to RFP. I mean, we just don't have the ability to build a commercial space or a multi-use building. We have to put something out to RFP in order to get a developer interested. So that's why we're doing this, and that's why I'm including the Tannery Work Group's recommendations as well as the prior work group's recommendations as part in the RFP.
This is just talk.
Can I go?
We need a decision.
All right.
Okay. Okay.
You have a presentation.
Hi.
you wanna give us. You've got,
My name is Tom Resick, and I live at 67 Rawson Avenue. I'm chair of the Friends of Tannery Park, which is it's broader based than a neighborhood group. It's a group separate from the Tannery Work Group. I was also a former member of the Tannery Work Group, and I'm a member of the Camden Park and Rec Committee. It appears that the draft RFP we are discussing today is first and foremost seeking the sale or lease of the Tannery site as a whole, meaning 2.8 acre parcel, to a developer. A sale of the Tannery site, now named Tannery Park, would contradict the consensus plan, and I want to underline consensus plan that was reached by the Camden's Tannery Work Group and accepted by the Select Board for the Tannery site to be a multi-use community-themed space. The Select Board appointed the Tannery Work Group. The Select Board appointed Tannery Work Group met for 18 months with monthly meetings. The work group then presented progress reports at 3 large, well-attended community meetings, and these were also workshops that everybody sat down and went through these ideas. And these meetings were spaced over a time as we progressed. This was talk about community process. This is the biggest involvement of community I've seen in the 10 years I've been here. And anyway, I will continue. The town sponsored and supported the work of the group by retaining facilitators. There were at least 3 facilitators working with us. I don't have the figures, but I'm sure the town spent at least $30,000 working with the Tannery Work Group. And that included a landscape architectural firm where we went out to the property and sat there and worked on it to help the group reach a consensus. In that consensus plan, the greater area of the site would stay public, and that's the real issue here, public, for the purpose of it being developed into a park or community space. Now, I know in Camden, that seems to be a community park. We don't have any. We have parks. We have a lot of parks, but we don't have parks with playgrounds where people take their kids and go play on a playground. As well as, being developed into park or community space, as well as a farmer's market. A smaller portion of the site, approximately a quarter to 1/3, according to our consensus plan, could be leased and developed. We're talking about leased and developed. That's the portion. Leased and developed for a building of commercial or non-commercial purposes. We talked a lot about educational facilities.
Therefore, it is important that the final draft of this RFP needs to be revised so it is clear to the town of Camden and the people that have worked on this project for so long that the town of Camden is not seeking the sale or lease of the whole 2.8 acres. I mean, crazy. It'd be crazy to do that. An RFP would be appropriate in finding a developer for a specific commercial or non-commercial building or structure on a portion of the property as we specified in the consensus plan that we've dealt with the community on, but not for the sale of Tannery Park. And when I say Tannery Park, the select board named it Tannery Park officially. The town of Camden's EPA grant application for the $200,000 that the town has been awarded states, this is from the grant. One more minute. I think maybe I can get somebody to cede some time to me. This is from the grant application. Because of the site's optimum location, the town of Camden envisions it being redeveloped into a park or community space, as well as a year-round farmer's market. It is likely that a portion of the property will also be separated and redeveloped for commercial use, such as restaurants, boutique retail stores, or small local business. I'm just going to reiterate that. That is in the Tannery, in the EPA grant application. So, and there was a meeting where that was announced, that was the grant application, and we all signed up for it. Since the adoption of the Tannery Work Group report, things have happened. The grant was filed, we won it, based on the Tannery Work Group report. The Select Board officially named the former Tannery site Tannery Park. The town offered the Camden Farmers Market a permanent home at Tannery Park. If it's sold, there's no guarantee of that. Permission was given by the Select Board for community fundraising for a future playground at Tannery Park, which we started doing. We did it for a season, and the creation of a dedicated tax-deductible account for that purpose with the town. We have an account at the town where we've been raising funds for a playground at the park. That fundraising has already received donations and pledges to over $11,000 towards a future playground. The Camden Lions Club pledged $8,000 towards that. They were very excited. They want to put a playground in this town. Town manager, this is the last thing I need to say, Town manager Audra Collar-Bell, in announcing EPA's awarding of the $200,000 grant to Camden, stated in the April 26th Camden Herald interview, this is quoting Audra, "I can't be more excited that Camden was successful in securing this grant from the EPA. We worked really hard to communicate through our grant application all the hard work done by the community, particularly the Tannery Working Group, to come up with a multi-use development plan that fulfills the dual purposes of creating economic and business development opportunities as well as providing community and recreation areas for the town. The cleanup grant will give the Camden the ability to complete the final cleanup activities that are necessary to realize the plan." And then she acknowledged all of the work the community and the Tannery Working Group have devoted to the town-owned Tannery Park property made the difference. This is Audra's words, made the difference in what she said was a very competitive grant process. The community's worked really hard in getting this far with the Tannery Park, so it'd be crazy to start over again. Please amend this RFP to prevent a sale of Tannery Park to a developer and allow the community process that we've started to continue. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Paul Cartwright. Couple of minutes, fine. I was on the select board when we acquired this property, and there was, even at that time, a strong support for public access on this property. And I understand the idea of trying to include all the ideas that may come in, but you're making a very big mistake when you try to sell the entire property. That's not on the table, and I don't think you're going to. Who here is in support of having some of that land publicly owned and public access? You get my point? What we're trying to do here is say, we want part of that property to be owned by the public, used by the public for public purposes, not for sale. And if you don't get that, you're just never going to get this. You're going to put this out here, and as this gentleman's frustration will go on, because nobody is going to go for it when they see the public reaction. And I have to say this, dishonesty in putting out an RFP that says, you may be able to buy this whole property. They will not be able to buy that property. It's not going to happen. I think you're opening yourself up to a lawsuit. If you apply for a grant on the basis of a community project, and it's clearly stated in it, and they say was part of the criteria we used in determining whether you should get that grant, how can you then justify selling the entire property to a private developer? And maybe it's a great developer to start with, but what happens in 5 years when they go belly up and they decide they want to do something else? Get out of it, sell it to whatever. It's just not realistic. So.
Hi. Anita Brosi-Scott here. I totally get the rationale for having an RFP, and I see why it's necessary in order to proceed with the next steps in the property and the cleanup. And I think it's a great idea to have a developer involved or designer involved in planning the spaces. But I was part of the original, all the original tannery work groups. Roger knows he's worked with me since the get-go on these various work groups. So I've seen the whole process close at hand, and I understand it. I feel that first of all, the development and the plans for the development have gone through an evolution. And we saw that evolution arise out of the first group, and then the need to take a public vote. And the public vote, unfortunately, was poorly phrased so that there was a yes or no, plus or minus, develop or park. And people like me who believe in the mixed use, which is what I think you're trying to get at here, had neither way to vote. We could not provide the clarity that we felt the town needed in order to move forward. So then you very wisely developed the second tannery work group, which came up with that mixed-use plan. So we have gone through an evolution, but what I have seen in the RFP is that you've muddied the waters by, instead of showing it as an evolution to a point that we have reached with some clarity, we are including in the RFP every step of that evolution, which has muddied the waters. And I feel that the town is desirous of coming up with a plan that incorporates the park and incorporates the playground. And we're asking a developer to help us with that. That's what I kind of hear. But you've muddied the waters by saying, we're willing to sell this. It seems to me that what might be wise is for the town to retain ownership of the whole land and to lease a portion of it for commercial development, like many people lease commercial land and buildings all around the town. And the developer would come up with their plan for that section, and the advantage to the developer would be, and to the town, it can be a mutually beneficial process where the town is receiving some design expertise. The developer is able to incorporate their plan with the town's desires by saying your playground can go here and my thing can go there, and there's room for the farmer's market here, and that's what we all want. But I feel that what this RFP is doing is asking the developer to do that design work for the town for nothing. So what makes sense to me is to, instead of suggesting a sale or lease, to suggest strictly a lease, that we do retain ownership of the playground, which the developer doesn't want to have liability over. We do retain ownership of the community space and farmers market area, which we would like to have as a community usable space, an informal community space, as opposed to our formal spaces in town that require a lot of jumping through hoops to be able to use. And then we lease the other section, and the developer, we can offer the developer a quid pro quo for their assistance to us in planning our community spaces. We can say, hey, you'll have the advantage of planning how your space works with our space. We'll give you X number of free years lease in exchange for that help in design. And then we can ask for the creativity that is a great idea. Yeah, we want creativity. That's what we want. But that way, the developer is going to feel justly compensated for exercising their creativity and developing something that will benefit the town. So that would be my proposal.
Lehman, I'm just thinking it's 5:20, and I know we got 10 minutes. I just want to make sure that people from a variety of,
Yes, I agree.
a variety of opinions can speak to this.
Okay, we've got time for like 2 more comments.
I'll try and be very short. I feel this RFP gives short shrift to the farmer's market, that the farmer's market is critical. It mentions to a developer, well, look at the old report, look at the new report, et cetera, but almost everybody who is in favor of a public use of this property is here because of the farmer's market and a playground, et cetera. And my suggestion would be, either in combination of leasing, owning, maintaining, that you could draw a perpendicular line, just like this, right? You know, keep this slab in the RFP and keep the rest of this as town property for the farmer's market, for a playground, for any other use. I know that one thing that some people talk about is the fact, well, the farmer's market is only there part-time. Well, it's not as if the Opera House has 24/7 programs. The harbor is dormant for half the year, one of our greatest assets. The Snowball is dormant for more than half a year. So that, you know, community viability doesn't have to be based on full-time use. Yes, we put a lot of money into this property, but relative to the town, it's a drop in the bucket. We just put $27 million into a school that a lot of people think we didn't need.
The definition of community space as it would relate to the farmer's market?
Well, part of it is that I guess the town would own the property, lease part of it to the farmer's market for use during the farmer's market, and a lot of energy could be put into developing other uses for that land when the farmer's market isn't there. It could be concerts, it could be craft fairs, it could be a skating rink in the winter.
Is community space then kind of an all-purpose
Yes.
term? And that would include the farmer's market?
Yeah.
Could I just say one quick thing? I'm sorry. I'm Nancy Lubin. I'm a member of the Farmers Market. I'm actually a grandfathered old member of the Farmers Market since they started.
You can wave it at them, too.
Thanks. I just want to say that one of the problems the farmer's market has in developing even more of an attraction is that we don't have a permanent home. And until we have a permanent home, as we have been promised we would have, then we can think about ways that we could become year-round. Perhaps we could have a building that would shelter us slightly during the inclement weather. There are 100 things we could do fairly creatively, and not to mention the fact that the farmers market actually helps 20 or 30 people every year make a living. So it's not as simple as, oh boy, the farmers market's a great activity for the people in Camden. It's also a livelihood for a lot of people who are preserving our land and creating a nutritious local fare. So I just wanted to say there's a lot that could be done with the farmers market.
Have an interest in responding to the RFP to build a building?
I don't think it occurred to us, because the last thing we had to do was figure out whether we could even be there this year. And that didn't occur to us, and I could take that to our heart.
I mean, I like the idea of, you know, an open-air farmer's market or an indoor farmer's market, but it takes someone to do that.
Well, it does, and I don't know that, honestly, the way we work and the
Right.
fact that we are now in full season for the
Right.
farmers.
I get that.
That we could possibly
Think
do
about
that,
it right
but
now.
I can take it up with the farmers market.
Yeah.
There are many other farmers market members here, they might be able to speak to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got to move on. We've got,
You mean, yeah, I'm just thinking.
Okay.
And then maybe Andreessen after.
Yes, I'm Mark Haskell. I'm a Camden resident. I've been following this for about 15, 18 years or so. The town's got about $2 million in the project so far. As a taxpayer, I'm going to first say I fully support the farmers market being there. I fully support it being as partial public space. But this town has an awful lot of public space already. What I would like to see is it put forward and let a developer make us an offer. Well, they know with the stipulation that you're giving them the different guidelines, they know the guidelines we're looking for. If they come in with something that our people say, no, that's not at all what we want, that decision isn't made today. That decision is going to be made later on. I'd like to see something come in there that a developer can propose and justify to us, giving us the stuff that we're looking for, plus something that will go on our rolls, on our tax rolls, so that we don't have to pay as much in our taxes to support all the free stuff we give out. Currently, like I said, I support the farmers market, but the farmers market pays the town $1 a year for the use of that property. And I think it's a wonderful thing to be there, but like someone just said, there are people there making a living. Every other businessman in town that has a business in town has to pay taxes on their property. And these guys are getting the use of our property for free. The farmers market is not the only one. And I know I'm a horrible person for suggesting that other people should have to pay for the stuff that they do. But I'd like to see you go forward with it, go forward with your proposal, put the, whatever you call it, RFP out there, and let somebody that has an idea to give us something there, let them make the suggestions and see what they have to offer. They just might blow us all out of the water and say, wow, this is great. Let's get it out there and let them do something.
Maybe
Thank you.
Last comment from Mr. Andreessen?
Ray Andreessen, also part of the Tannery Work Group. I just think that one problem with this RFP is that it's eventually, you get some responses, it's eventually going to go to the voters, and unless there is a set-aside for public land or public use of the land, it's going to get knocked down, and all of your work for how many, a year or a year and a half is going to go out the window. I do think that when you have your preferences in the back, it should say preference given to the work of the Tannery Work Group, too. It just says it will take in there. I think it'd be good to say preference in there. And I like the idea of, instead of the full 2.8 acres, that you set aside a portion of that and just say we're going to sell or lease 2 acres or one, whatever. I think it'd be a better idea, and I think it'd get a lot more positive response from people within the community.
All right. Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. Last comment, Jeff Scott, one.
Short ones.
Like 10 seconds, Jeff.
I'm really good at speaking very succinctly. You're done. I can't win even when I'm trying. The one idea is some kind of incentive for the developer. I don't know if there were any in here for plans, some quid pro quo that's spinning off what Anita was saying. Another idea, set aside a minimum amount of space, not saying where it is, for each element of the recommendation group. So many square feet. That's it.
All right, thank you. And feel free, anyone, to provide comment to me by email, jmartin@camdenmaine.gov. We'll certainly take it all.
I'm concerned that you're seeing this as a competitive process when through the years we have seen that there's actually very little interest in this property, and it may not be a competitive process. You have not defined the percentage weight for each element yet, which is a real problem because that will definitely shape the responses.
Understand.
Okay.
And we may just get one applicant, and then it's not a competition.
All right, if you've got, are we done? Is that it?
I mean, I think we got one more gentleman. Energy, can you hold off for one more minute? All right.
Just one.
Yes.
It's so interesting. Have you considered, because I haven't seen it anywhere, putting down
the information that the bridge on Rawson Avenue has been closed. And it's not only closed to vehicular traffic, which I live on Rawson Avenue, so in certain ways that might be a benefit for me, but it's being closed also to pedestrian traffic. So that makes a whole difference about, you talk about access being important. I think that's very important. And I don't think many of us here in town know exactly what the plans are or the reasons for doing what is being done. And I would like to see that made more apparent to everyone.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Steve?
Thank you.
We adjourn?
Yeah, we're adjourned, and we'll meet on the fourth Monday of the month. Steve, you got a second? I think we've got,
What? I don't know. I've got mine, but yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm sorry. I know I speak loud and clear.
Hi, Ellis.
How you doing?
I'm great. How about you? I think Paul was trying to get me. No, somebody else. Don't forget to take,
Based on what they think that the population wants. We call it democracy. Where we come from, we have democracy. You Americans can't spell it. It sounds good to say it, but make it law. We showed you the order, and now they're just destroying the whole thing. I apologize if you thought I was a little rude or something. It's not my intent. And I don't like to get the impression that I mean what I say, and there's something wrong in the state of and you're talking about a new work group? Decision group?
well, someone's got to push up.
Yes.
Well, you got to put something out to someone to develop, right?
You don't need that. We told you we don't need that.
We have to, we got to get someone on board. How do you get someone on board to build something? Right? We got to tell some developer, hey, we would like you to build a office building in this location, or residential in this location, on this property.
No, you can tell him we have full piece of land set available for a developer to do something, but you can't buy the land. You can rent it or you can do something else. And maybe a non-profit organization, an educational thing, or something else that is prepared to do this kind of thing.
I hear you.